Hey, it's 7:44. Welcome back in. Well, it's something we don't like to think about, needing a will. But it is an important thing to have, and with that in mind, should a trust be a part of that will? Well, Stewart Welch from the Welch Group is here to talk about that this morning. Good morning, sir.
Morning, Janice.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
So what is a trust? How does a trust work?
So a trust, the typical will, somebody like if you and I are married, I probably leave it outright. So they'll leave it outright to a spouse, or the wife leaves it outright to the husband. She gets everything. A trust says we're going to actually give it to you in an entity. The entity has a trustee. It has its own trust account. It has its own trust tax return.
So that person that the name it is given to doesn't outright control things for a number of reasons,
Yeah,
right?
there can be lots of reasons. I think a lot of people, the typical will does leave it outright to either the spouse or children, and a lot of times that's a mistake, and we just talk about a couple of examples where you definitely need a trust. So if you have minor children cannot receive assets, so you have to have a trust.
Okay.
And a lot of times
So that's a legal thing.
That is a legal thing, but a lot of times a will say I'll leave everything to my wife and otherwise to my children, and they might be killed in a common accident, and then you have it going to minor children, which it can't do. So you have to be really careful.
So then
with
what
that.
happens if that were to happen?
Actually, it goes to the court, and the court decides how those assets are going to be held, and they'll court-appointed trustee. So it's a real problem.
Okay. The next one, you say adult children who legal age, but they may have some issues that wouldn't be responsible.
And listen,
enough.
I've been doing this like 40 years. They almost always have a child that has some issues. There's always a child. And it could be drug addiction. It could be very poor with money. It could be a gambling addiction.
So you just don't want them to get rid of everything at one time because of that?
You would never give money outright to a child who's drug addicted.
Okay.
That's like handing them a loaded gun.
Sure.
It's a really, really big problem. So
someone else would
you put it in
money.
trust, and you have somebody, a professional trustee that manages that money for them. They still get the income from it, so they're still getting assets.
But you could have a spouse in the same way, right?
You could. So I think you could have a spouse where you might have a concern that they might remarry the wrong person, and those assets that you intended ultimately to go to your children end up with somebody else's children. So a trust makes perfect sense there.
Okay. And the next one on the list, what does that mean, the liability?
Liability, so you, particularly if you have a lot of assets, you leave assets to, let's say, divided between 3 children, you worry about them getting divorced and those assets ended up in that divorce, or they could have a lawsuit. They could be subject to a lawsuit, and your assets end up somewhere else, and a trust can protect all of that. And so trust makes a lot of sense in those areas.
All right, and the last one, a large estate, that just kind of says
so
in
you
itself,
have an opportunity to create a
on.
trust for multiple generations, just like creating a financial safety net. So lots of reasons to consider it.
Okay, again, something we don't like to think about, but something we all need to think about.
Thank you,
All right.
Janice.
Stewart Welch.